All right. Good evening, Erev Tov. All right, you can hear me. Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Jeffrey Spitz-Cohen, the Executive Director of Jewish Veg, which is a nonprofit organization which is brought Rabbi Gersh to the U.S. for a national speaking tour, and this is our second stop. Tonight is such a special evening for many reasons. First of all, in addition to this great live audience, there's more than 80 people on Zoom around the country. Oh, is it? Oh, good to know. All right. That's his halo. It's always something, isn't it? But thank you for pointing that out. Yeah. Right, but the camera. All right. All right. We're going to keep going. So tonight is a very special evening, as I suggested, because it's not just the wonderful people who have come tonight. Is it?
It's the only one we got, sir. Keep going.
Yeah, okay. All right. Is this better? Is this better? All right. So there's more than 80 people around the globe who are also with us on Zoom tonight because there was so much interest in this program. And what's unique about this program on this tour is that we have two, not just one, wonderful rabbi. So I'd like to thank, first of all, the magnificent Sharon Leibovitz, who is manning the zone, who has been a pleasure to work with to organize this program. Thank you, Sharon. Rabbi Gersh Silver, please unzip your coat, because he's rocking, and I do mean rocking, the Jewish Vegetarians of North America t-shirt, which was the name of our organization for 40 years before 2015 when we became Jewish Veg. So if he put that t-shirt on eBay, he could retire. So, but no, he looks great in it. So Jewish Veg, real quickly, we're a national nonprofit organization whose mission is to educate Jews about what our Torah and tradition say about our dietary choices in animals, and to inspire and help people, our fellow Jews, to transition toward a plant-based diet in accordance with Jewish values. So when I say inspire and help, I hope tonight you will be inspired, if you're not vegan yet, to take some steps in that direction, and we're here to help. At the back table where the nosh is, you'll see two things. These plant pathways cards, which is a program we have. It's a free program which provides free resources and a community of people like you who are taking the first steps towards incorporating more plants into their diet. So I encourage you to take one of these and sign up for the program, because it's completely free, you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. Secondly, back there at the nosh table, which I know you'll all be visiting after the program, there's a flyer you'll see for jewishveg.org Jumpstart, the word Jumpstart, which is a 21-day Jumpstart, which starts next month. It's a program which will transform your life. And that's no exaggeration, which will provide cooking lessons, medical advice, everything you need to really clean up your diet and get healthy. So we encourage you to take advantage of that program. It's normally $150, but thanks to a generous donor, it's been subsidized and it's only $36. So if you really, really want to improve your diet this year, our Jumpstart program is a really tremendous opportunity. Before I introduce the rabbis, just one more thing. I want to thank the sponsors of this tour, this 8-city tour, Dr. Marcia Miller and Unreal Deli, who generously supported this tour because there's a lot of plane flights. He's speaking last night. Yes, thank you. Thank you, sponsors, because last night, which was Yom HaShoah, was the only night in the next 9 where Rabbi Gersh will not be presenting in a different city. So this has been a complicated tour, but we think it's going to be well worth it. And we're so pleased to see so many people turn out for it. So Rabbi Gersh Silver, as you might have guessed from his t-shirt, is a longtime member of our rabbinic council. And the thing I love about both these rabbis, and Rabbi Silver in particular, is he understands the main purpose of Judaism is not to perpetuate our religion. The main purpose of Judaism is to make our world a better place. And that's what Rabbi Silver is all about. Similarly, Rabbi Akiva Gersh. He grew up in New City, New York. Went to anyone from New City? No? Muncie, very close. All right. All right. Jewish geography. He went to Brown University, majored in religious studies, went on to Yeshiva University and majored and got a master's degree in Jewish education. He and his wife made Aliyah. They live in Pardes Hana with their 4 children. And he's in Israel. He got his smicha to become an Orthodox rabbi. And about 2 years ago, he branded himself as the vegan rabbi. Now, he's not the only vegan rabbi, that's for sure, but he is devoting his professional life now to educating Jews, like Jewish Veg, about what our tradition and text have to say about our dietary choices and our relationship with animals. So we're thrilled to have both these rabbis in dialogue with you, in dialogue with the Zoom audience, and in dialogue with each other. We're really in for a treat, and it's my pleasure to turn the mic over to the 2 rabbis, or the 2 people you really want to hear from tonight.
All right. Shalom, everybody. Shalom lekulam. Erev tov. Shalom, and thank you, Rabbi Silver. Amazing to be here. It's not always the case that I get to sit next to a fellow vegan rabbi. So a real honor and pleasure. And thanks, everyone, for coming out physically and virtually on Zoom. This is a special evening, and it's also an important evening where we're going to be talking about, as Jeffrey just shared with us, this very, very important topic of what we eat and how it basically affects everything in our lives and in the world. All right, there's a billion things to say about this topic. If we said them all, we'd probably be here until, I don't know, at least Sukkot or something. So we're gonna pick some things, and then we'll, as Rabbi Silver said before, we'll turn it over to you to ask any questions that you have. But I'll share a few thoughts just to begin, okay? First of all, I want to say some people like to collect stamps, some people like to collect coins, baseball cards, whatever. I like to collect Jewish teachings that pertain to animal welfare and the impact of our food choices on our bodies, on the animals, and the environment. There are a lot out there. All right, I'll just say that. You know, I know when people look at me, I come across as very Orthodox, probably an Orthodox Jew, which I am. I'm proud to be. I'm also vegan, obviously. And these are 2 things that I was not at all growing up when I was younger. I was very, very disconnected Jewishly. Grew up in a very, very disconnected, secular, assimilated family, and ate everything that wasn't vegan. All right, my diet was literally like lots of meat, no vegetables, and lots of junk food. seriously. Right? So my life turned upside down in many ways and on many levels. But those two are very, very interconnected for me in my life. I'll just say that because I grew up in a family that wasn't very Jewishly connected, I went to public school. And like most parents who sent their kids to public school in New York back in those days, my parents felt very guilty that they didn't know much about Judaism to share with me, so they sent me to Hebrew school. All right. In my generation, at least, I know most people who went to Hebrew school, with all due respect to all the good Hebrew schools out there. I love that there are some good Hebrew schools out there. That was not my experience, unfortunately. And it was a big turnoff to anything Jewish for me and pretty much all of my friends. There was like a whole generation of just like, bye Judaism. Anything that has to do with Judaism. So by the time I was done with Hebrew school, which was 8th grade, I was really done with anything Jewish. And that continues to high school and continues to college. I was like barely like even admitting to anybody who asked me that I was Jewish. Right? It's actually very connected to the last minutes of Yom HaShoah right now, that the only thing that really kept me saying yes to the question, are you Jewish, was the fact that many members of my family were murdered in the Holocaust, and I felt like how can I not even admit to the world that I'm Jewish, right? Having that as part of my family history. Anyway, long story short, when I was in college, my first year in college, I had many realizations, many epiphanies. It was basically the breaking down of that great big bubble that I grew up in suburban New York. And that it was a great way to grow up. It was a great childhood, but it wasn't very real. And a lot of things were hidden from us, and people didn't talk about things, probably because they didn't know about it either, right? Especially the impact of how we're living in our modern society. And so I had a lot of realizations that first year in college, and one of the main realizations I took from that first year in college was the fact that we are utterly destroying the planet because of our seemingly everyday innocent or seemingly innocent everyday actions. From what we wear, what we buy, what we use, what we put down the drain, and of course, what we eat. So I like this, incredible, first year in college, and also incredibly challenging as this kind of old world of mine and old perception started to crumble and fall, and slowly a new one was being built. In hindsight, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, right? Even though it was hard, even though it was challenging, because I started to piece together, what is a better way to live? How can we be living on this planet in a way that's not destroying the planet, that's not harming other life, harming ourselves? And so by the end of that year, I decided, as a result of this big epiphany, I was going to become an environmental studies major, and I went vegetarian, right? About a year later, I went vegan. That was 1995 when I was 19 years old. Do the math, you have my age. But basically, I got a deep dive into environmentalism, environmental studies, environmental activism. This was like my main mission. I wanted to dedicate my life to doing what I could, whatever, even a small amount, to alleviating some of the environmental problems that we humans have caused, especially in our modern day times. Again, long story short, we don't have time for the entire story, but eventually I went on a study abroad program for environmental studies. And it was on that program, again, I'm leaving out a lot of details, but I started to study about a lot of different cultures, because we had like an anthropological kind of section of our coursework. And I was reading about all of these different cultures. And I was like, wow, like all these amazing rich cultures from all over the world, traditional cultures, indigenous cultures, they have rituals, they have connection to their past, to their ancestors, to their values, to their teachings. Like, what do I have? I feel like I had nothing. And I went up to one of my professors one day when I was feeling really, really frustrated about this. I said, Judy, her name was Judy. I was the only Jewish person in the program. And I'm like, Judy, I feel like I have no culture, like nothing that I grew up that was like really meaningful and deep and significant. And she turns to me and she's like, you're Jewish, right? I'm like, yeah, like, so what? And she's like, do you realize how deep the Jewish culture is? I'm like, no. She's like, do you realize how many amazing people have come out of the Jewish people? I said, no. And then she hands me a book, right? Of course, not written by a rabbi, but by a shaman. Okay. And it's basically, again, long story short, the thesis of the book was basically about that the ills of our society, the problems of our world can all be traced back to the fact that people today in our modern day world are disconnected from their past. They're disconnected from their traditions, and they're disconnected from their ancestors. That, for me, where I was at that point in my life was like, it was like a call from heaven. Okay, I got to find out like what it means to be a Jew. I don't want to become religious, just like, oh, Yofi. All right, I just wanted to like a little bit, more understand, right? Why am I telling you this story that has nothing to do yet with environmentalism and veganism? Because it basically set me on a path of discovery, learning, and becoming more aware of my Jewish roots and my Jewish tradition. Along the way, the same teacher that handed me that first book starts handing me all of these articles about what? Judaism and the environment, Judaism and our food choices, Judaism and veganism, Judaism and animal welfare. And I'm like, what? Where did this stuff come from? Right? This is like just like right up my alley, but no one ever talked about it my entire life. No one ever brought it up. No one ever mentioned it. Where was it this whole time? Right? And of course, it was in the books of our tradition. It was in the texts of our tradition from hundreds of years ago and thousands of years ago. But people either didn't know or just were too busy with other things to talk about it. So I'll just kind of sum up this opening statement, right, by saying the following, that our tradition is chock full of teachings that have to do with compassion for animals, with inspiring us, motivating us, and let's be honest, demanding from us that we live conscious and aware lifestyles, that we're aware as much as we can be about the impact of our actions on others, other humans, other animals, and in the entire world. Right? And so that's when I got into collecting these sources over 20 years ago, because they're not all like in one book. Right? And they're kind of hard to find. There's one in the, many. There's in the Gemara and then in the Jewish law books and in the Midrash and in the Chassidut and in the Kabbalah. Right? So it doesn't seem like Judaism has like this like great collection of teachings about animal welfare and the environment. But when you bring them from all of these different places and together, you have a mountain, literally a mountain of teachings that are telling us, be careful with how you live on this planet. Be careful with the choices you make every single day. Be careful with your food choices specifically, because of all the choices we make in our lives, it's the food choices we make that have the greatest impact, or positive or negative, right, on our bodies, our health, on animal welfare, and on the health of this entire world.
I kind of like standing up when I speak for some reason. Anyways, thank you very much, Rabbi Kiba. And thank you for traveling here and all around the world speaking about this very important topic. And I also want to thank Jeffrey for his incredible passion and devotion to a cause that I believe is the most important cause there is. And that is the saving of this planet and the protection of innocent life forms from barbarism and from cruelty that has been inflicted upon them on massive scales that we can't even comprehend. The only way to even begin to comprehend it would be by quoting Holocaust survivors. We just commemorated the Holocaust, who said that these slaughterhouses are like a permanent Treblinka forever for animals. It's an outrage that our species would be perpetrating this type of horror upon other life forms. And they say that, you better hope that if there is a God up there who's going to send us one way or the other, you better hope he's not a just God and he doesn't remember what we did to our fellow creatures. Because if our excuse is, well, they're not as smart as us, so who the heck cares about them? If you're compared to the Almighty, you're probably not that smart either. I don't ascribe to such things, but people who do, they got a lot of splaining to do by the time they get up there. We have a horrible situation, in my opinion, that's been inflicted on this world largely through religion. Religion has not been the solution to the problem, it's the cause of it. By teaching a bunch of nonsense from a human perspective that the entire cosmos, all this universe, everything around us, the vast number of stars that are as plentiful as the amount of grains of sand on every single beach in the entire world, if you can even fathom that all of that was put here for us. What kind of conceit and arrogance is that we believe? And our people, the Jewish people, we perpetrated that in our arrogance and our lack of understanding that, oh yes, God put all of this here. All the universe was for us. Well, Galileo had something to say about that, and Copernicus, well, actually, we're not in the center, you know what? And Darwin had something to say about that. We're just a late comer. All of this put here for us. And our ancestors said, not just us, Jewish males. That's who it was put here for. The entire cosmos, for Jewish males. Sadly, there's some people who still believe this stuff. All right. Nowadays, through evolution, through science, we recognize this is all nonsense. And we have an obligation to look after our fellow creatures and not in our arrogance say it's all put here just for us. And you know, these stories, they're fanciful. They're very pleasant, nice stories, but they're not quite accurate. I'm not sure if you realize, do you know why Adam and Eve got into so much trouble? They were raising Cain. Do you know why Cain couldn't control his temper? He wasn't able. The story about Lot's wife, you just got to take that with a grain of salt. Yeah, the story about Noah, well, it really doesn't hold water. The story of the Tower of Babel, that's just a tall story. But there is such thing as Babylon. You'll recognize it every time the rabbi gets up to speak, as he begins to babble on. You'll notice that. My friends, these stories are the best that people could do in the Bronze Age, trying to figure out how everything got here. And they got a lot of it wrong, and a lot of the mistakes are tragic. And they gave us an arrogance to think that we could do whatever we want with the other creatures. There are things that are very salutary in the Torah, which is why I'm a rabbi. One of those things is that every single human being has a divine spark. The other is that every creature that was created is good. It fits into the tapestry of life, even the mosquito. And you know, when I address this topic, I agree with Rabbi Akiva. I feel kind of like a mosquito in a nudist colony. I just don't know where to begin. You know, where do you even begin to talk about this problem that we have here, this cataclysmic problem in which our own greed and arrogance is destroying ourselves? And I say the way to start is to recognize that the foundational documents that we've written have been an error. And that if you believe these myths, these creation myth, that everything was put here for us, and that we can do anything we want to the planet, and it's inexhaustible, if you believe that myth, then you will be myth-led, myth-guided, myth-informed, you'll myth the boat, and you'll probably be misogynistic also towards women. So we need to kind of liberate ourselves and have a rational approach. The problem is that the massive amount of cruelty and carnage that we're inflicting on the animal world is coming back to haunt us. We've met the enemy, and it's us. So what's the solution to all this? Is there a solution? I believe there is a solution, and you're part of it by being here today. The solution is rational religion, in which we combine the revelations, the incredible findings of science that teach us that, as Einstein said, either everything's a miracle or nothing's a miracle. We believe, as Einstein did, everything is miraculous. And that science teaches us that we weren't just put here in God's image and everybody else is in some other image, but we're part of the fabric of life that's been going on for billions of years. And this is a wondrous, beautiful, awesome planet. A tiny, pale blue dot, as Carl Sagan said, in a sea of darkness. And seen from that cosmic perspective, we realize how precious everything is, and every life form is, and every day is, and how precious this planet is, how beautiful it is. And when we see things from that cosmic perspective, when Carl Sagan said, let's turn the Voyager around the distance of Saturn, and let's see what Earth looks like. He saw a pale blue dot. And he said, from that perspective, all the harm, all the cruelty, all the violence, all the suffering, all the ambitions to take over the world and to inflict harm on others, all of it seems so petty, so little. The whole point is that we should have this cosmic perspective, and Judaism has it. They imagine that there was some supernatural being looking down, but we can imagine from a cosmic perspective what's going on. And what's going on, we are incredibly fortunate to be on this planet. We are extremely lucky to have been born here and to be born in this time. And we have an obligation as Jews to give back. So I'm gonna conclude like this part of it. One of our great heroes is Moses. And he wasn't as old-fashioned as you think. He was the first one who could download data from the cloud onto a tablet. All right. Of course, he had two of them because he was binary. And he also had apps for everything. He applied himself to good causes. He lived life with aplomb. He received the applause of people. But his greatest app was the app of appreciation. He had a prayer for everything. And if we could plug into that app every day, then we would achieve happiness. And as Jews, we should appreciate everything around us and every life form around us. And we should recognize how lucky we are to be on this planet and to take care of it and to realize that we're all one. That's the point of the Shema. If you recite the Shema and you walk out of the synagogue and you look at someone who has a different face or race or place and you think, well, I don't want to deal with that person, or you look at other living things and you say, I can kill them or torture them or maim them, then the Shema is, you're just wasting your time. You might as well go and play tennis or do something other than sit in a synagogue and mouth words about unity and harmony and then go out and destroy creatures. Because I say to you this before I sit down, the destruction of this planet and the infliction of massive harm that we're doing is the worst form of blasphemy. It is the most egregious sacrilege against creation. And if we, in the religious field, can say all these prayers and do these things without speaking out against it, then we are making a mockery of Judaism. And our ancestors did not give their lives and sacrifice themselves so that we could decide, well, I'm not going to eat with my kids because they don't use the right dishes. There was something a lot more important that Judaism was meant to do. And it was meant to do it at this time and this place. That is to save this planet and to extend compassion to other living things. What I'd like to do now, thank you. Thank you. What I'd like to do now is to move this along 1 minute, not just for question, because there's a lot of smart people here and activists. You have 1 minute to say your piece and to ask a question, or just say your piece if you want to don't ask questions, but you got 1 minute to do whatever you want, and we'll take 1 minute to answer so we can move this along. And then if it's okay with you, we'll take 5 minutes, both of us, to sum up at the end, okay? All right, let's, Sharon, who's gonna orchestrate this? Jeff, you wanna do it?
Well, I've got the first question is, what does vegan mean to you, Rabbi Gersh?
On the simple level, vegan means I'm not eating anything that comes from animals, right? Obviously, no meat, no dairy, no eggs, no fish. But it's also aligning my food choices. It's also aligning my food choices with. Sorry. Vegan on the simple level means that obviously I'm not eating anything that comes from animals. No meat, no dairy, no eggs, no fish, anything like that. On a deeper level, it means I'm aligning my food choices with the values of Judaism. I do want to, with full respect, disagree, and we're rabbis, so we're allowed to do that, right? Even in front of a live audience. I want to disagree. You are welcome to do that. Here. Good, thank you. I want to disagree with one thing that Rabbi Silver said, right? At least one. For me, as a Torah observant Jew, Torah is the answer to these problems, right? Inside the Torah for thousands of years, we've had the answers to the problems that we're facing today. As if the Torah was already kind of like preloaded, right, with the solutions that humanity is going to face in the future. We're in that future right now. Right? We've had these values, these teachings, these principles from the beginning for thousands of years. Right? If someone takes Genesis 1:28 and says, look, it says, you should conquer the world and master the world and rule the animals. If people say that means you can do whatever you want to the world and whatever you want to animals, that's not the proper Jewish traditional understanding of the verse. Because we as Jews never just take the face value of a verse, never. Right? That's not what we do as Jews. We have thousands of years of commentary on that verse and every other verse that tells us what the verse really means. And what does that verse mean? Rav Kook talks about it, right? Rav Hirsch talks about it, right? Rabbi Jonathan Sachs talks about it. These are more modern day rabbis, but basically saying that no way in the world would an all-loving God want us to be these cruel rulers over creation and creatures. We're supposed to have compassion for all living things. And our tradition is chock full of teachings, values, and obligations Obligations. It's not just like if you want. It's an obligation. It's an obligation in Judaism to show compassion for animals. It's a mitzvah min Torah. There's a mitzvah from the Torah, a commandment from the Torah, Tzar B'alei Chaim, that says you're not allowed to cause unnecessary pain and suffering to animals. It's from the Torah. There's not a discussion anymore, right? So we have the solutions in our tradition. What we need to do is to rediscover them and then apply them to our everyday life.
Hi, Rabbi. So first, I got to say, I was an observant Orthodox Jew for many years, and I struggled with, from the very beginning, a man and a woman and 3 sons somehow propagated the whole world. So we're going to right there let you think about that for as long as you want. But my question for you, regarding the food is, there are so many laws and instructions to sacrifice animals, burnt offerings. We're murdering animals by the command of God, for all these myriad of reasons. And how do we connect that with rules and instructions to be compassionate? It seems to be a contradiction, and I'm hoping you can provide some clarity. We're also both vegan, so I'm hoping you can provide clarity so I can then use it in the future when people try to turn that on us.
I'll say really quickly, it's a great question. I've been asked that question many times, and I'll say this. First of all, the Rambam, Maimonides, talks about this in the Guide for the Perplexed. He explains that the reason why God gave us the korbanot, the sacrifices, is it's a historical thing, right? The entire world was offering animal sacrifices at the time. And it would have been too difficult to basically demand from Bnei Israel, from the children of Israel, not to do something similar. That they would look around and see the whole world doing this, and they had to be, it's impossible for us to understand. The Gemara says that basically there was like a lust back then for animal sacrifice in humanity. We can't understand that because it's thousands of years later. But back then they had such a desire for it, especially because the world was doing it. So God gave it. So in the historical context that it existed, okay. Of course, the Torah talks about it a ton. Like half the Torah is about the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and the korbanot, the sacrifices that were brought in there. That's one thing, okay. That it was kind of like a sign of the times. It was in the context of the times that the Bnei Yisrael, children of Israel, were living at the time, and when that command was given. That's one thing. Number two, there's an opinion that says that if the children of Israel never sinned with the golden calf, they never would have been given the Mishkan. They never would have been given the tabernacle. But their sin with the golden calf show that they need this physical something in order to worship an infinite, purely non-physical entity, right? And that was like the conduit. But ideally, that's not the ideal. Just like eating meat, the permission to give to eat meat was given in the Torah, but that's not the ideal. Same thing with the sacrifices. It wasn't the ideal, according to this opinion, right? But it was given because of the level that the children of Israel were at the time. If you look at Jewish history, last thing I'm going to pass it over. If you look at Jewish history, 2/3 of Jewish history, we didn't offer sacrifices because we didn't have a temple in order to do it, right? We haven't done it in 2,000 years. So most of Jewish history, yes, it's in the Torah, of course, it's all over the Torah. But it's not part of our religious practice now for 2,000 years.
I'll take my time now too. Because what you bring up is the reason why many Jewish people, especially young people, want nothing to do with Judaism. It's absurd. It's totally inconsistent and it's nonsensical. And who wants to follow a practice that is nonsensical? To suggest that God would say that you have to splatter blood all over the place and kill all these animals because he can't tell people that they're so infatuated in doing it, it's absurd nonsense. And the Torah says God enjoyed the aroma. So is he just telling them to do this and pretending that he enjoys the aroma just to allow people to go around slaughtering massively all these animals? There's something called Occam's razor in science. Like if you have two explanations, what's the simplest one? That's probably the right one. Is that the simplest one is They were wrong. They didn't know. They were influenced by the surrounding cultures, and so they sacrificed animals because they thought, in those days, they thought that God needed to be fed. You look at Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Egyptian mythology. They thought gods needed to be fed, and they were incorporeal, so that the way you feed them is you burn an animal up, the smoke goes up, and they enjoy the aroma. That's what's going on. Maimonides is saying, well, God wanted us to do this because we needed that. And this is supposed to make sense to people? And he's supposed to be like the icon? You know, the animal sacrifice system, it always gets my goat. And I consider it a lot of bull. And the only you that I think we should sacrifice is not EWE. We should only sacrifice the old you that we are today for the new you that we could become if we lived up to Jewish values and ideals. That's the you that we should sacrifice. And it's hard to do it because we're attached to who we are. Changing who we are is difficult. But what can we learn from the sacrificial system? A sacrifice in Hebrew is korban. It means to get close to. It was their way of trying to get close to God. And you can't blame them. That's the best they could do. But nowadays we know better. We shouldn't try to explain and rationalize and say, well, there was a good reason for all this stuff. Let's just say that was their way. Here's what we do to sacrifice. Sacrifice means literally to make holy. Korban means to get close. Let us get close to that part within us, that loving part, that spiritual part that reflects a creative power, which is how I define God, a creative power that's in all, that unites all, and that transcends all. Let us get close to that part, and when we do, then it causes us to want to give to others. And sacrifice means to make holy. So what that means is that we spend our time, our money, our love, and we can convert ourselves into holy beings by helping other people. That's what it means to sacrifice. Slaughtering animals, and Orthodox who say, oh, I can't wait to get back to the good old days. We're going to resurrect the sacrificial system again. Genug. You know, we've already outgrown that. You want to go back to that in utopian times? So this stuff we've outgrown. At least we should have. And that's what sacrifice should be, to not eat what we want to eat, to change our lifestyle so that we have compassion for other living things. That's the sacrifice that we should be talking about.
So the next question is from our Zoom audience. How do we explain that meat was given as the, quote, as the green plants after the flood?
So it's a big question. There's different answers given. There's different opinions, like why meat was, the permission to eat meat was given after the flood and the generation of Noah. Let's just make sure we're all on the same page, right? It's very clear from verse 129 of Genesis that the first diet given by God to humanity was purely vegan, purely plant-based. Look at the verse, right? It's very clear. And then many, many centuries later, after the flood, permission to eat meat was given after Noah and his family came out of the ark. So the big question is why? Like, why that change? Right, so many different explanations are given. I'll share with you one, which is shared by Rav Kook, Rav Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, the first chief rabbi of pre-state Israel, and others. That basically, I mean, why was there in the first place? The flood was a result of the moral degradation of humanity, the spiritual decline. And there's a belief, so to speak, of God that the humanity was no longer on the level to hold the ideal, right? That the ideal was to eat a plant-based diet, as it says in Genesis 1:29, but we degraded so greatly, morally and spiritually, that we couldn't hold that level anymore. We couldn't hold ourselves back, right? And so therefore permission was given as a concession. Many commentators say that the permission to eat meat was a concession. And Rav Kook says it was a temporary concession, and that in the future time we're going to return to the original plant-based diet, all of humanity. Right? And I'll share one other thing from the Abarbanel. Many people bring down this source from the Abarbanel, a very famous Torah commentator from centuries ago. He says, it's really interesting because almost in the same breath, right? Like a verse later, when God gives permission to eat meat, God warns humans, don't kill other humans, don't murder. And so he comments, he says, because of the eating of meat, which is new for them back then, they're now ingesting all of this cruelty, right? And harsh energy, so to speak. And therefore, God was afraid that they would become more cruel and kill their fellow human beings. Therefore, they needed to be warned. Right? You're going to be eating meat now. Watch out. Don't kill each other.
I agree with Rabbi Kiva on this one. I also want to compliment him on being raised in a way that Judaism was not important and discovering on his own and devoting his life. Doing what he does is no easy thing. Becoming a vegan, a practicing Jew, learning all that, it's like kind of like, I guess his namesake, but my yarmulke is off to him for doing that. As far, and I do agree with him about that. The idyllic state of the Garden of Eden is we were vegetarians. We were not eating meat. And then when people got really screwed up, they just figured, okay, I guess that's the best they can do. But the ideal is to go back to being a vegetarian once again. By the way, why wasn't Noah the first Jew? Why was it Abraham who became the first Jew? Noah supposedly listened to God because Noah, God said, I'm going to destroy the whole planet. Every living thing. By the way, is that a just God? I mean, like everything, every person, every animal, everything, because somebody ate an apple. I mean, give me a break. But in any event, the Torah is telling us something amazing. Noah couldn't be the first Jew because Noah, when he was told, I'm going to destroy the whole earth, he said, okay, that's cool. I have no issues with that. Just tell me what to do so I can save myself and my family. It says he walked with God. Noah was righteous for his generation. Compared to everybody else, he was a saint. Compared to Jewish standards, bad news. Because he didn't try to save other people. What happened with Abraham? God says to Abraham, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. What does Abraham do? He says, okay, just leave me out of it. No, he says, no, you can't do that. He argues for these evil people. That's why he was considered the first Jew. Don't do that. You're a just God. That's what it means to be Jewish. It means to argue and to plead for others who aren't even like us, like the animal world, to feel compassion for them. As Edwin Flagg said, when anyone weeps, including the animals, when they weep, we weep. The Jew weeps, and we're Jewish because being Jewish requires no abdication of the mind.
You want to take a question over here, please?
Hi. Hi. I just want to clarify that there's a big difference between vegetarian and vegan, because you mentioned vegetarian. And vegetarian is a very cruel industry, even crueler than the meat industry, because the cows have to give milk and they're put on rape racks, and then their babies are taken away. And then when they don't have any more milk, they're slaughtered for meat. So vegetarian is very cruel, and I just want to bring that up.
You have a question? No. We have a question.
Okay. Thank you.
Rabbi Akiva. Real close. Okay. So how about the passage about basar v'dagim on Shabbat? I know people who are vegetarian or vegan all week long, but they insist that on Shabbat they have to have basar and dagim, meat and fish, or fish.
Right. So that's a very good question also. So whenever I sing those songs, I leave out basar v'dagim. When I lived in America, I used to replace it with Yerkot v'rice stream, right? Because we used to buy vegan rice stream ice cream. Yerkot is vegetables in Hebrew. So when my friends would sing basar v'dagim, I'd say Yerkot v'rice stream. Anyway, it's a good question, but for me it's like very clear, right? There's no obligation to eat meat in Judaism, period. The only time there was ever an obligation from the Torah to eat meat in Judaism was when the temple stood in Jerusalem, like we talked about before, with the sacrifices. And even most sacrifices weren't actually eaten by the people that brought them. Either they were burnt all on the altar, they were partially burnt on the altar and partially eaten by the priests who brought them, and sometimes a little bit by the people who brought them to the priests. Right? That's the only time it was ever an obligation. And even that amount of meat was like minuscule. Literally, we would be celebrating right now in this room if every single human being alive today ate the required amount of meat that Jews ate from the temple back then. We're talking about almost nothing. Okay, hold on. Okay, no. So it says in halakha, in many places, in many different books of Jewish law, that it's a mitzvah to eat meat on Yom Tov. Okay, I've seen it myself. It's a mitzvah to eat meat on Yom Tov. Now, normally we think a mitzvah is an obligation, right? So so it's an obligation, but it's not. Mitzvah is sometimes used in a way that doesn't mean obligation, but means like it's a good thing. It's a good thing, okay? If you can do it, it's a good thing, basically. Sometimes a bit more stringent than that, like you really should try to do it. But many books, including the Shulchan Aruch Harav, the first Chabad, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, in his book of Jewish law, he says it. He said it's a mitzvah to eat meat on Yom Tov, but it's not a chovah. It's not an obligation. Very clearly, okay? So, and then there's just one other quick thing. In another book that I'm learning now, it says the same thing, okay? But in the footnotes, it says, what does it say? Okay, it says it's not an obligation, but it's a mitzvah, okay? But if it harms you, if eating meat would harm you, or you just don't like it, you have no obligation. Okay, and I'll just say the last thing. The reason for, I always say that a lot, sorry, but the reason people eat meat on Yom Tov and the Chagim on the holidays is to fulfill the mitzvah. There is a mitzvah from the Torah to be joyous, to be happy on the holidays. That's meaning Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Okay, and the way that they fulfill is by eating foods that they like. Okay, vegans and vegetarians don't eat meat because they don't like those things. So the question is, how could eating food that came from industries that caused untold suffering and pain to animals cause us joy, cause us happiness? It's not just a vegan or vegetarian thing, it should be all of us.
So there's also 7 levels of vegetarian.
Well, let me take a crack at this one. That's the problem when you have to defend passages that are just completely indefensible. You spend your whole time, instead of talking about the issues, trying to defend things that are just impossible to defend. You can't say that the Torah doesn't tell you to eat meat. Well, it's a mitzvah. That means it's good, but it's not really good because some rabbi a few years ago said something else. Why bother defending all this stuff? It's easy. It says that you on Passover you have a lamb. Okay. It doesn't say except in the, there was no temple in Jerusalem when the Torah was written, so it couldn't possibly say that. So listen, there was no, can I answer?
No, I have to.
No, what do you mean you have to?
A discussion about Orthodox Judaism.
You went for 10 minutes about it. I'm just giving.
Sorry, we came here to talk about Judaism and veganism, Judaism and animal welfare, and half the time it's an attack on Orthodox Judaism. That's not what this is about. If you want to continue, that's fine. You're going to continue by yourself. I can't participate in this.
Yeah,
you're being very rude and disrespectful to Orthodox Jews and Orthodox Judaism. Let's talk about the issue that we planned on talking about instead of all these jokes and attacks on Orthodox Judaism.
Yes, excuse me.
If you're agreeable to that, I'm happy to stay. If you're not, I'm going to leave.
Okay. What I'm agreeable to is if a person asks you about killing in the Bible and eating meat, and you respond, I have an opportunity to respond as well. I didn't.
Attacking Orthodox Judaism. You say there's never a temple, there isn't a God, there isn't all these things. That's fine if you have that your opinion. Share that somewhere else, not here, where an Orthodox rabbi is coming in to talk about a very important issue.
Why don't you tell me what I'm allowed to say?
All right, if I may refer
I can't say that there's no temple.
Rabbi Silver, Rabbi Silver, if you would give me 15 seconds.
Take 15 seconds.
I not taking a side here, but let's stick to the topic, which is Judaism, veganism, and the intersection, and not get into critiques of one movement or another. Let's just stick to the topic that people came to hear.
Okay.
All right.
Let me just say this. I find it very troubling if someone asks a question about Orthodox practice, and then you go on explaining Orthodox practice for minutes and minutes, and then I try to comment on it, and I can't say it, or you're walking out. I find this to be censorship. And I have a right, if I want to say that I don't think that the temple was around when they were saying these things, that's what I do. But in any event, as far as the question goes about eating meat, okay? I'm not going to comment on orthodoxy. I'll just comment on this. To suggest that the Torah says it's a mitzvah to eat meat, but that doesn't really mean that it's a mitzvah. I don't understand this way of thinking. I think it's a lot easier just to say that our ancestors have come a long way. And the purpose of kashrut, which is lost on many people who practice kashrut, if you want to get to the root of kashrut, you will see that the purpose was to spare animals suffering. It was to try to make the slaughter as quick and painless as possible, because at that time they didn't understand how to even get by on a vegetarian diet, and they didn't think there was any purpose to it. So the basis for it, the principle behind it, was to spare suffering to the animals. And now you have folks practicing kashrut, which sometimes causes more suffering for the animals, because you have to keep in mind, why are you doing these things? And what we need to tell the Jewish people, Orthodox, Reform, Reconstructionists, whoever you are, atheist, let's look at why our ancestors, Jewish ancestors, came up with kashrut. It wasn't so that you could bury a fork or wait 3 hours. The whole purpose was, at first it said, don't boil a calf in its mother's milk, because that's what the Canaanites did, and they thought that was barbaric. And then from don't boil a calf in its mother's milk, rule after rule after rule after rule after rule came along, until now you're not mixing milk and meat. Instead of recognizing, the reason they said that, because it was considered barbaric to boil a calf in its mother's milk. Let's apply that principle. If I apply it today, what do? I become vegan, right? That's the whole purpose of it. And that's what we should be concentrating as Jews. Let's think about the purpose behind these rules, and let's apply them in a way that's actually going to make a difference in our lives.
Give me 1 second. Sorry. There's a lot of questions. Does either rabbi feel connected to Jesus, a Jew who fought for the removal of the animal sacrifice system?
Well, I guess I've already offended some people. Now I'll offend the Christians. The story of Jesus doubles down on human sacrifice. Jews repudiated it. They created a religion around human sacrifice. Okay, and they say that Jesus was the Lamb of God, and he was the sacrifice. So Jesus didn't actually do away with the sacrificial system. He doubled down on it and said, now we have to accept a human being as a sacrifice. If you look at what Jesus actually said, as best we know, if you really want to know what he was all about, as scholars and historians know, whatever you do, don't follow organized, institutionalized Christianity. That's going to get you into a heap of trouble. If there was such a guy as Jesus, he was a Jewish liberal who was a socialist and a communist, and he was very pleasant and loving, and he probably wouldn't think much of eating meat, and he probably wouldn't like all these guns, and he probably wouldn't like all the hatred that's done in his name, and he probably would tell his followers, don't commit posthumous identity theft against me, because I want nothing to do with you people.
Okay. Hi. Oh. Yes. Hi. Thank you both. I'm pulling away a lot of information. I have a question, but I just want to preface my comments by saying that I was a child of the 60s, and I'm used to and comfortable with protests and disagreements. But one of the things that I take away from all, and I can't wait to get to Israel in May and join the street crowds who are a little concerned about democracy there, but that's a different issue. I don't want to go there. What I really appreciate this, but I'm reminded a little bit of in the 60s, we had peace activists, and when we had conferences, they were not always so peaceful to each other. So we're all human. We all have room to grow, to make mistakes, to grow in terms of our ability to empathize with each other and respect. And I feel humbled, and I appreciate the differences. You're both very passionate about this cause in different ways, and that's the most important thing for me. My question is, I would like to know if either or both of you have some resources you could share, the best compendium of sources from our teaching, both the Torah, the Talmud, any commentaries, even modern commentary, that can help those of us who do enjoy studying Torah and Talmud and Midrashim. So I think that I haven't found such rich sources. I, for one, am very comfortable with the idea. I so appreciated your sharing your story, the young man here. And I so appreciate, I know, and this might be going over a minute, but I really want to pull some of this together. I appreciate so much that you feel like you want to move on, and yet there is so much richness in our texts that I fear, even though you grew up Orthodox, there are so many ways of looking at it. And it's so important to recognize historical context. It was brilliant and inconceivable to me that in a world where there was child sacrifice, baby sacrifice, we had Jewish thinkers who may have not gotten past the sacrifices of animals, but they were worried about how the animals were being treated in future generations. It's remarkable if you allow and accept the historical context. It's remarkable that the Jewish spirit was moving in that direction. And yes, important not to rationalize and to be able to move on. But I would like to know resources, and they could be emailed maybe to those of us who had email addresses here.
Really quickly, if you go to my website, akivagersh.com, there's two things you can do. Either go to my website, I have an online course, you can find it on the website, or you can give me your email address at the end. I put together recently a 25-page PDF with not all the sources, but a lot of sources having to do with everything we're talking about today. So,
let me just suggest to you that Jewish Veg has some of the most amazing information that provides spirituality and inspiration, facts from Jewish tradition and Jewish culture and history. It's incredible. If that's all you did, dayenu. If you just went on Jewish Veg and looked it up, you'd have all the background you need. It's incredible. Another guy, Richard Schwartz, is brilliant. You just read Richard Schwartz, you're good. You're good to go. I would also strongly recommend read Carl Sagan, some of the quotes by Albert Einstein. Yeah, he's brilliant and very compassionate. And read and look into modern Jewish thinking, Reconstructionist, Reform, Humanistic. They have things that you'll resonate with, that appeal to your rational mind, don't insult your intelligence, and they also can help inspire you to want to live a moral life. There's a lot of, there's a lot of stuff out there. And Jewish Veg, that's the place to go.
I have a question from a Zoom participant. What do you think of a raw vegan diet, perhaps more of an Eden diet, and what makes a raw diet sustainable?
I'm not a food nutritionist, so raw food is, a way of eating. That's not the way I eat. I like to eat as much raw food as I possibly can because I think it is healthy for me, but I also like to eat cooked food. So I can't really answer the question, I'll be totally honest with you. But yeah, if you look at the verse in Genesis 1:29, it doesn't sound, it's not only vegan, but it sounds raw food as well.
Rabbi, you want to speak of that?
Yeah, I just think we need to be careful about judging the degree that someone is able to lead a vegan diet and casting aspersions on people because they're not frum enough or vegan enough. I think some of these things are kind of harmful. But what we need to try to do is to not just move people, but move our society towards veganism so that people can find options in the store, and we patronize places that have vegan food, and we tell them we're here because you offer vegan food, and try to move our society in that direction. I think that would be really, really helpful if we can do that. I'm glad when I became vegetarian about 12 years old, and then I started phasing out all animal products, but back in those days, there wasn't much you could find. But today there's a lot of stuff, and we need to encourage that. And I just want to share with you also, there was a guy named Tuvia Bilski. I don't know if you've heard of him. He was a partisan fighter in World War II, and he went to his community and he said, I know this sounds crazy, but the Nazis are rounding up people and they're exterminating entire villages. And the people said, that's crazy. You're exaggerating. This is nonsense. And they, by and large, he was ignored. He went out with his brothers and saved hundreds and hundreds of people in the forest. He was able to recognize the danger, and he did something about it. And he said, freedom begins with an act of defiance. That's what we need to do today. We need to defy what's going on in the world around us because it's bad news. And you tell them that, it's not really that bad. The climate, it's okay. The earth is going to be all right. What's going on with the animals is not so bad. It is that bad. And we need to use him as an example to alert people to how bad it is. Because most people, they're just happy to go on the way they were. We need to defy what's happening and change our ways.
Question.
Hi. Rabbi Gersh, I still have yet to hear some kind of orthodox explanation for why you're vegan.
Okay, so when I talk longer, I go into more details and share tons and tons of sources. It's not really, fitting for this kind of format, but basically as I started to explore my Jewish roots more and my Jewish heritage, I started learning more about Judaism, and then eventually I went to Israel and I went to yeshiva in Tzfat, and I sat there for half a year and started learning Torah for the first time in my life when I was 22. Came back to America, continued learning in yeshiva in Muncie, New York for 5 years. And as I was learning, I was already vegan, right? I was already vegan. So I didn't need an explanation why to be vegan. I was already sold on the idea. But what I did find year after year, that mountain of sources that I alluded to before grew and grew and grew. And for me, the more Torah I learned, the more years I spent in yeshiva and the more years I've been learning since, the more Jewish reason I see to be vegan. Again, it's a good question, but I'll just say this: there's four main reasons, for me at least, why we should be vegan from a Jewish perspective. One, we kind of talked a little bit about them here and there, but just to put them into one sentence. Number one is Tzar Ba'alei Chaim, right? The Torah commandment not to cause unnecessary pain and suffering to animals. Clearly, the factory farming world is violating that. Number two, Bal Tashchit, not wasting valuable resources. Clearly, the factory farming world is violating that with its intense use of water, land use, other resources, all the pollution and emissions that come out of it. Number three, Shmirat Haguf, the mitzvah, the Torah commandment to take care of our health, our health. Clearly, it's already been proven by modern science that vegan diet is the best diet, hands down, for human health. And number four, spiritual reasons. I'm not going to go into it right now because it's very, very complicated. If anybody wants to hear more about it, later at the Nash table. But there are spiritual reasons in Judaism not to eat meat. Judaism basically says, I'll just sum it up like this. If you look into Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, it says that eating meat should only be for people on a very, very high spiritual level, because you need to have very, very clear and specific intention and mindfulness when you're eating meat in order to do the correct spiritual elevation of the food, which most people today, that's 99.9999%, don't have. So anyone who's eating meat today, burger, ribs, chicken wings, all that stuff, they're not doing any spiritual elevation. They're just fulfilling their ta'ava, their lust, which is a word that the Torah links with eating meat. Multiple places the Torah calls eating meat a ta'ava, which in Judaism is something you're supposed to run away from like crazy. It's not only a desire to lust, right? And so it's like a clear rebuke from the Torah. Right? Okay, I gave you the permission, as I said before, because you morally degraded yourselves, right? So it's a concession, but you really shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, there's a lot of other good reasons for Orthodox people to be vegan and to not use meat, and not just Orthodox, but everybody. One is when they wanted to find a wife for Isaac, what was the litmus test? Remember? She's going to say, not only will I get water for you, but let me get water for your camels. The litmus test for who qualifies to be the wife of the patriarch? Kindness to animals. Judaism is the only religion I know of that has animal rights 3,000 years ago. I practice law. We don't have any rights for animals today. We might say, well, you shouldn't be cruel to animals, not because of the animals, because they think it would degrade human society. An animal still has no rights. They have rights in the Torah. They have the right to a day of rest. 3,000 years ago, whatever was written, a day of rest for animals, animal rights, compassion for animals. It's ingrained in Judaism, and we should take pride in that. We have not only Shabbat, we have the Garden of Eden. All the food, all the plants are for people to eat. We have as our ideal in Judaism, in our sacred literature, that vegetarianism, veganism is the right way to go. We have passages say, before you eat, feed your animal. Let your animal eat first. And what's one of the most important principles in Judaism? Rachmanis, isn't it? Compassion. That's why. If you have compassion, then you have compassion. You know where the word Rachmanis comes from? Rechem. It means the womb. It's nurturing, the nurturing part, the female part. And in Arabic is Rahim. This is something that goes all the way back to our original sources. That's why we should practice. In the old days, in biblical days, they didn't know how to be a vegan. They didn't have the sources they couldn't go to the supermarket and get all this kind of stuff. So they had the same compassion, but they couldn't do it. Today, we can. And human beings are the only creatures on earth that actually know the harm and know the cruelty and know the pain that we're causing animals, and we do it anyway. Not out of instinct, but we just do it anyway out of callousness. That's a pretty strong condemnation of human beings. And some of our species actually gets pleasure out of slaughtering an animal. They call it hunting, which they call a sport. It's not a sport. It's an organized slaughter. And to say that you derive compassion, you derive fun out of killing, I'm happy to say that another reason why Orthodox and everybody else in Judaism should go vegan is because hunting is not permitted in Judaism for sport. The thought, I'm going to take a life just for the fun of it, that is abhorrent in Judaism.
Yes, rabbis. Very interesting conversation. The Malchamavis, the angel of death, the most destructive human being ever was Adolf Hitler. And I read that he was a vegetarian.
Another question?
So for clarity, I also approached Judaism as an adult. But for clarity, I chose to pursue being an Orthodox Jew at 25 to 30 years old, and I had to let it go. But my question for you guys, both of you, is I'm gonna take out the big elephant in the room, and to not step on your toes with puns, I'm gonna try to kill two birds with one stone. How do you, as how do you, there we go. How do you deal with or respond to when individuals say, both on your faith and on your diet, don't try to force your beliefs on me?
That's a good question. I like that one. You want to take that one?
One of the things I love the most about this work, that I do, teaching and sharing on this topic, is that it has nothing to do with me. I'm not sharing any of my beliefs. All I'm doing is sharing sources from the Jewish tradition that tell us that we have an obligation to be compassionate to animals, think about our food choices and their impact on all the things we've been talking about. So it has nothing to do with my thoughts, my beliefs, or my opinions. Absolutely not at all. But I'm trying to raise awareness of the teachings in our tradition already, from hundreds of years ago and thousands of years ago, that people either never saw, because we have 1 billion teachings in Judaism. We're over 3,000 years old, so we've collected lots of teachings, right? So not everyone sees this, even great rabbis, with all due love and respect, right? No one has the time to learn everything. Right? As I said before, they're scattered all over the place. Right, so my intention here is to not force anything on anybody, just to raise awareness and let people decide for themselves. Of course, I would like that they would come to the same conclusion that I do, but I don't try to force it on anyone. I try to bring it to people's attention and let it seep in, go from the mind to the heart, and then it changes their actions, hopefully.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, because what I do, my métier, my profession, is to try to convince people to believe a certain way. That's what rabbis do. We don't get up here so that you leave thinking exactly like you did before. We're trying to get people to open up their mind to think in different ways. So I do try to influence how people think, and my desire is to help them find a way to unite reason and religion to unite spirituality. I call it inspirational Judaism, or after Einstein, who coined it, cosmic Judaism. I do try to influence people to think religiously and rationally at the same time, because irrational religion has caused untold horrors and hardship. And I believe, and I should explain to you, at Va-Dor, we have a tradition of speaking our mind and inviting people in. And because I disagree with someone, doesn't mean I'm insulting them, demeaning them, disrespecting them. It merely means that in Isaiah, they say, come, let us reason together. So I think the best way to arrive at the truth, which they did in the Talmud all the time, one guy would say one thing, somebody else would disagree, somebody would disagree with that, somebody would disagree with that. They didn't say, well, if you disagree again, I'm walking out. That's how you arrive at truth. That's what Judaism's all about. So I don't do it to disrespect. So I share my point of view in order to try to influence people and to create a dialogue. And let me share this point of view. In many religions, being judgmental is a very, very bad thing. And it's like what you're saying. You're kind of being judgmental. Like, what are you saying? You're judging me? And yeah, I'm judging you. Yeah, I don't hold back. The holiest day of Judaism is the day of judgment. The God that our ancestors worshiped was a God of judgment. If you don't judge right from wrong, that's the beginning and the end of immorality. In Leviticus, it says, chastise your neighbor if they are doing wrong. If not, you share in their iniquity. Right? Heschel said, in this democratic society, some are guilty, all are responsible. If our society is wiping out animals and torturing them and causing harm and destroying our planet, and we do nothing, and we're silent, and we don't form a judgment, then every moral leader you've ever read says we're responsible, we're guilty. All that's necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. Yeah, you better believe we're going to speak out about it. That's what we do as Jews. That's our obligation. Not in a dogmatic way, but we invite dialogue. So yes, I think it's very important that we cast judgment upon what's going on in this world and this society. And I think we should have not hesitate to say this type of diet is more compassionate than this one. This type of diet leads to environmental protection much more than that one. To me, that's what it means to be Jewish, is to judge. And we try to do it in an open forum where everybody gets a chance to speak, but I think it's very important that we do that. I think maybe we'll take one more question, then we'll do closing comments. We'll go for about 5 minutes at the end and wrap up. Is that okay? One more question? There's a question in the back.
I just want to say one thing. I've been vegan my whole life and Jewish my whole life. And I've been more reform in my Judaism and conservative at times, went to the Chabad, but I don't feel I know Judaism and the Torah, but I know basic principles of right and wrong and karma. But I'm also a lawyer. And a lot of times I find that you can always find evidence to support whatever you're looking for. But it's kind of like Jewish law and biblical law is the Constitution to like the law we are today, and it's how you want to interpret it. And like you have Supreme Court justices that disagree on the interpretation of the Constitution, and they then come to these rulings that everyone else may or may not agree with. And it's hard for us because I don't think any of us have the time to study the Torah and all these different religions and actually necessarily know the answers, but I think in our heart we know the answers. And I always felt like veganism was more my religion than Judaism because it felt moral and I didn't understand or know Judaism as a Reform Jew. I knew tradition, like, you know, going to synagogue for the high holidays. But I do think that this intersection is important, and when you can view it as like maybe viewing the words of tradition that might have been in a song, like the ice cream, you know, sometimes tradition just sort of just becomes a tradition, but maybe it doesn't make sense anymore. And that's why laws are constantly evolving, and the court systems we have today, and maybe religion, which is also our law, our constitution, our framework is meant for us to continue to evolve with. So just kind of wanted to say that because I feel like there's an intersection between both of what you're saying and, you know.
Thank you. I think you should both wrap up.
Yeah, I don't think I need 5 minutes, but I might go because you never know how long you're going to talk. But I would just maybe share one more final teaching. There's lots of other teachings out there, but just for the context of what we're doing here, I'll share one more teaching which comes from a modern rabbi in Israel today, one of the leading teachers of Jewish law, Rabbi Elazar Melamed, who put together an incredible book of Jewish law called Pnei Halacha, which is like the main book of Jewish law studied today in Israel and many communities in yeshivot. And he very much follows in the footsteps of Rav Kook, who we barely talked about, but really to like get into this, like you have to understand Rav Kook and his teachings. He died in 1935, right? And basically summing up Rav Kook, he has all these teachings that were compiled by one of his leading students. Again, let me just pause for a second and say Rav Kook wrote a lot. Again, he was the first chief rabbi of pre-state Israel. He was an ultra-Orthodox Jew, okay? And he wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote, and then his students later on, towards the end of his life and after he died, compiled those teachings into books based on common themes, okay? One of his students, his leading student, Rabbi David Cohen, was a vegan, inspired by his teacher and other things as well, because Rav Kook was a vegetarian, except he ate a little piece of meat on Shabbat. I'm not going to get into all the details just for time. If you have questions, ask me later, okay? But basically, his leading student compiled all of these different things that Rav Kook wrote in these different notebooks and put them into like, I don't know, a 20-page document basically. It's called The Vision for Vegetarianism and Peace. If it was written today, it definitely would have been called veganism, right? Back then, everything was called vegetarianism, right? He first presented it, I think, in the 1960s or something like that at a convention. Anyway, the teachings are unbelievable, right? He talks about, you know, the horrors of taking milk from cows and taking the milk away from the calves. He talks about the shame somebody should have in eating animals, the shame, right? And he talks about the moral degradation, right, that is the cause of us eating animals in the first place. Right? And again, and he says this in many places, that one day we will return to the Garden of Eden diet, the plant-based diet that's talked about in Genesis 1:29. And I'll just end with this teaching from this Rav who I mentioned at the very beginning, of Elazar Melamed, who lives in Israel today and is a leading rabbi in Israel today. He says in his book, in the section of laws about eating and eating meat specifically, he says that the Torah has all of these laws about compassion for animals to open up our hearts and get us ready for the future when we all Jews and all humanity, will stop eating animals. It's ingrained in our tradition. It's there, right? So kind of to, you mentioned in the back, about Judaism and veganism, in different interpretation, 100% I get into arguments with other Orthodox rabbis and they have their own interpretation of the same things, and we get, okay, it happens. That's like, again, what it means to, right? The Talmud and Judaism is very much like that. But it's all there, it's very clear. The laws about compassion for animals are very, very clear. There's very little wiggle room, if any, when it comes to the laws of compassion for animals. Right, and comparing it to what's happening in the factory farm world. That's clearly not in line with the laws and values of the Jewish tradition. So again, to borrow some of the words from Rabbi Silver, we have reason to take great pride in our tradition, that we have so many teachings and so many values and so many laws that direct our hearts and our minds and our actions towards this kind of lifestyle. The question is, we just got to do it, right? People are just used to tradition and used to eating the way their parents and the grandparents and great-grandparents ate. Well, you know what? We can't do that anymore. We can't afford that anymore. We don't have the luxury anymore. The world is burning, right? Animals are being slaughtered. 70 to 100 billion land animals a year are slaughtered so they can show up on a plate for no good reason, right? We, the Jews of this generation, have a responsibility to take the teachings of our tradition and apply them like they've never been applied before. That's the mission and the vision of our generation that no other generation before us ever had, because they didn't have to have it. We have to have it.
I definitely want to thank Rabbi Akiva for sharing his knowledge, his passion, his dedication with us here at a congregation Va-Dor on the Heritage. It's great to have various viewpoints, and especially a viewpoint that is advocating compassion and love and environmental sanity. My background's very different than his. I was raised by a classically trained Reform rabbi. I was steeped in Judaism, but a type of Judaism that was just, I was really blessed. It's just loving and wonderful, and had a great experience with Judaism since the beginning. And my dad taught me to try to use reason to understand Judaism. I think if we look at the world reasonably and rationally, we can only draw one conclusion regarding the Jewish people. We have totally, abysmally failed in our mission to be a light unto the nations. We're a failure. We can't even talk to each other and unite each other. And how are we going to unite the world? We can't even exchange views with each other without getting all upset when we need to unite. And what we need to do is to achieve unity without uniformity, community without conformity, and diversity without divisiveness. My dad used to debate everybody at JDL. He had a great time. We need to talk to people that we disagree with. If you're a Republican, take a Democrat out to lunch. If you're Orthodox, hang out with Reform. If you're an atheist, go. We need to unite as a Jewish people. Why is that? Because in my opinion, and I might be biased, the world is dark and we're heading in a bad direction. We were meant to be a light to the nations. I take that seriously. And at the risk of offending some, I'll say it anyway. If to us being Jewish is just a whole bunch of ritual and never getting to the spiritual, it's just going through motions without going through the emotions. If the most important thing about being Jewish is what practices you're doing, or we're just wasting our time. And progressive liberal branches of Judaism, they've totally failed to capture the spirit of Judaism. So most people run for the hills after the bar mitzvah. We're not doing our job, and we need to judge ourselves very seriously. And it's not because the people out there don't care. It's because we are not doing the job as rabbis and as religious leaders to get people to understand one thing, that the Jewish people have an important job to do. The world is coming apart. The environment is being destroyed. And we, in our tradition, every holiday is about creation. Shabbat, you ask, why would Jewish people, what's an orthodoxy about environmentalism? Every week we celebrate creation, and then we go out and destroy it. Let's start actually using what's in the synagogue outside of the synagogue. And I believe that, and I'm partisan on this, I'll admit to you, I believe the Jewish people are vitally needed right now because our tradition takes to solve this problem. Yes, we do. We have an indomitable spirit. And you saw it in the uprising of the Warsaw Ghetto and the Jewish people who have persevered through all types of horrors. These empires that tried to destroy us, the Romans, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, they had a love of power, but we have a power of love. We have the ability to transcend. We have a survival instinct, and the world needs our survival instinct. We also believe in the goodness of people. We have the capacity to bring out the goodness in people. We also believe in emet tzedek. We believe in the intellect to get us out of our problems and righteousness to solve our problems. We have what it takes to be a light to the nations. Now we have to implement it because the world needs us. And so I say to everybody here, don't shirk jury duty. And I'm spelling that Jewry. We're a small group of people. We got a big job to do. We need every one of you. And we need every one of you to get your Jewish friends and bring them into the synagogue. And bring your non-Jewish friends too so they can work with us. Yes, I believe we can do it. And the best place to start is what this gentleman is devoting his life to. It's by changing our diet and getting out of our comfort zone. And I'll conclude with this. Moses lived in a palace. He had everything he wanted materially, but he wasn't happy because other people were suffering. A Jew can't be happy if other people are suffering, including animals, if they're suffering. What did he do? He got out of his comfort zone and he sided with the slaves, not the masters. We need to side with the other animals that we share this planet with, because most people are going to do nothing about it. But my friends, we Jews answer to a higher authority, a Hebrew national by the name of Moses, who spoke frank to further the cause of justice, who was hot in the pursuit of justice and dogged in his determination to free people, who relished freedom, who mustered the courage to stand up to Pharaoh, who helped Pharaoh to catch up to where he should have been morally, and who got Jews out of a pickle by playing the role of Savior. So let us answer to this higher authority. Let us get out of our comfort zone, stop eating what's comfortable, and start changing our diet and radically transform our lives in this world. Thank you very much.
All right. How about a hand for our two rabbis? Thank you very much, Rabbi Silver and Rabbi Gersh. Couple of parting words. We're going to enjoy some vegan nosh in milk, so please hang around. You can ask more questions of the rabbis or me, and we encourage you to do that. And also in milk, if you're not fully vegan yet, please take advantage of our Plant Pathways program or the Jumpstart, which these are tremendous resources to help you get more plants on your plate. Lastly, I should mention, on Akiva Gersh's tour, which is taking us to 6 states in, I believe, 9 cities. 7 states, thank you. 7 states, 9 cities. Every program is being offered for free, which is true of virtually everything that Jewish Veg does. So we would appreciate your support, whether you're on Zoom or here tonight. And I'll offer you 3 quick ways you can do that. Our website, jewishveg.org. You can Venmo us. We take donations on Venmo at Jewish Veg. Or you can see me if you're here tonight, and I can even take credit card donations. We would appreciate it because, like I said, everything we offer is for free, but it costs our nonprofit some serious money. So thank you very much. Enjoy the vegan nosh in back, and we look forward to keeping this conversation going.
One other announcement. All the way in the back corner, if you want to get involved in fighting for Jewish causes and doing so in the political arena where it really counts and making a difference, because politics is determining what's happening with our world. See this gentleman right there. His name is Jay Schuster. Everybody's welcome here. He decided to come. I appreciate your being here. He's a great supporter of this cause. And talk to him if you'd like. And please hang out and talk to Rabbi Akiva, talk to Jeffrey. Don't go running off, because we have food for thought, and we also have thoughts about food. So join us in the back.